a couple caveats and promises before I get into some of these methods. So we have a wide range of methods depending on our theoretical orientation and our problems, and we've already seen a bit of that. These methods vary by our subfield, and so we've had discussion of our subfields, and we're talking, I think, mainly about sociocultural anthropology here, but a little beyond that. I see these methods as multidimensional in terms of their flexibility, and that flexibility depends on your epistemological or your ontological leanings or orientations. Restated is we can take these methods and we can reuse them and repackage them to accomplish multiple goals. And I think the methods provide a fundamental platform from which to engage in transdisciplinary and synthesis research. So I'm not going to make the argument that it's our methods that help us bridge out completely. I mean, I don't want to leave our theories behind, but I think they are a very, very good sort of bridging mechanism for us as we reach out to other disciplines. So I did a word cloud, or I had a graduate student help me do the word cloud. On anthropological research methods. And so you can see probably all of the terms, many of the terms that we've talked about already today are showing up in this word cloud. You can see some of the major ones: participant, ethnography, methods, research, observation, etc. But you see a number of other terms. So this is kind of a nice anthropological start to a discussion of methods where I just kind of throw them all out there for you. We weren't able to get participant observation kind of hyphenated, one of our main methods, so it's kind of separated there, but it still comes out strong, and we could talk more about it, but let's not. So another way to kind of get a handle at our research methods is to go through a recent handbook in cultural methods handbook in cultural anthropology by Bernard and Gravely. And if you read down the topics, you know, it goes by perspectives, acquiring data, and then interpretation, etc. If you look at it, you see a wide range of sort of orientations or perspectives, including discussions of epistemology, etc., and meaning. You see some standard methods down there of interviewing, participant observation, behavioral observations, structured interview, discourse, visual, and then interpreting anthropology, and we have kind of the statistical reasoning with numbers to text analysis, cross-cultural research. So this is another kind of way to throw out all the possibilities out there of our methods. And this is a very useful book to have. And so another way to kind of break that down and maybe go below that word cloud or table of contents is to look at principles and practices. So I came up with some that struck me as like what makes our methods kind of unique to us. And the ones I came up with were holism, cultural relativism, fieldwork, ethnography, multi-sided, large toolkit, people-centered, culture, structure, and process. Now, as we get further down, we get a little more specific, and I'm sure that if I redid this, I would come up with a few more. But if I think of, in preparing this presentation, these seemed like things that made me recognize the use of these methods as anthropological. So let's go through these each. Holism, we've already mentioned that, and I think it's a fundamental principle in anthropology. It's part of our DNA, if you will. We don't discuss it that much. We kind of live it. We don't question it that much. But I think what's important is that meaning or understanding and behavior are generated by interconnections of a whole, whatever that whole is. You know, that's, I think, a fundamental base to our methods. That, you know, today we say we're interdisciplinary and we're bringing all of that. But for anthropologists from the very beginning, I believe what separated us, what defined us compared to other disciplines was we had this holistic perspective. And I've said to my students, I think it's a very brave and courageous and ambitious, perhaps foolish approach, but it's something that I think very few others do. And more importantly, I think very few other disciplines kind of recognize that that's implicit and tacit in your methods. And that the specific cannot be understood without reference to that whole or some subset of that whole. So we recognize that we can't study it all, but we constantly come back to kind of check where are we vis-a-vis this broader holistic understanding. Reductionism and parsimony are suspect unless holistically contextualized. So we are reductionistic, and we do reduce things down, and we do focus, and we do become very parsimonious. And some of us do, some of us don't. But we constantly, in one way or another, come back and kind of check where does that fit within this broader holism perspective. So I think fundamental to our methods is holism. Cultural relativism. Now this is the notion that, well, you can see the cartoon up there a bit. I was wondering if this, hopefully this is appropriate. That resistance to universal assumptions about sociocultural processes. We do believe in, we have evolutionary anthropology, and there are universals and there are changes over time, and we've heard already Paige's presentation too also accounts for that. But we first, before we're willing to accept that, we want to check it to see about cultural relativism, that other groups and cultures are different, etc. The focus on cross-cultural or group patterns and also exceptions and alternatives to these patterns. So we're not just looking at the normative, what's the broad pattern, but we want to explain those patterns and variations in those patterns, or variations around the norm. We want to give a possible voice and articulate value to sociocultural phenomena in marginalized, underserved, and underrepresented populations. So another thing I think implicit in our methods is that we often try to give voice to populations and people that have not been heard and value that voice. And we do want to focus on the intercultural or group patterns of agreement and disagreement. Fieldwork. This has come up already, and here are some pictures of fieldwork early in the 1930s, 1920s, and 30s, and et cetera, and then fieldwork today. And these are just two examples from the Pacific and the Trobriand Islanders. So fieldwork for us is very, very important. And it's the real world places for engaging people. And to me, again, I mentioned already, my focus is on engaging people. The real world place. It doesn't have to be in a distant island, in an exotic place where you get those tropical diseases, etc. But it is a real world place. We, at least sociocultural anthropologists, we don't do our field work so much in a lab. There are some exceptions to that, though. It's still fundamental to our discipline, both real and imaginary. So doing field work, whether it's in an urban environment close to your university, or whether it's in a distant location that requires learning a new language, learning new behaviors, practices, etc., being far away from things that you're comfortable, that still is a very, very important process. It's also part of an imagined world for us, that it's kind of our rite of passage. You know, years ago in graduate school, you could not get your PhD if you did not go and do field work in a distant, exotic, you know, faraway place. And if you were in graduate school at that time, you would see graduate students coming and returning from the field and et cetera. And some people didn't come back. They came back, but not to the anthropology department. They kind of left, or et cetera. But it was kind of very much a rite of passage for us. So it's an opportunity for grounding and validating our theories, methods, and goals. Again, I think this going to the field, as we say, whether again it be to Starbucks, is really about testing our theories and methods. We're a very empirical-based discipline significantly, and so fieldwork is that place where we can do that. And it's professionally and personally challenging, this rite of passage. so we have lots of stories of anthropologists in the field. It's part of our lore and history. Paige has already told you about her scars, and we got off on that. It's something. It's a trial and very much a ritual, and so it's part of what kind of bonds us together. So again, back to those principles and practices that I talked about. Another one is ethnography. So this is the empirical grounding of our research during fieldwork. So anthropologists, we do ethnography. We take our theories and our toolkit and our goals and objectives and take them to a physical place and ground them through interactions with people, looking at institutions, structures, processes. It's very, very much engaged. It's inductive. It's reflective. We go to great lengths to try to minimize our assumptions before we enter the field. So we are very, very inductive. That does not mean that we haven't written an NSF proposal that had all the hypotheses laid out, et cetera. But when we go to the field, we still go with those, but we're open that those may change. And it's also a time for reflection and processing during ethnography. It's focused, but it's flexible. So ethnography is not just hanging out or doing whatever comes to you or writing down whatever comes to you. Whether, again, you're in the field or you're in a meeting like this, it is focused, but it's also flexible that you can adjust your insights and pursuits. Certainly, it's a triangulation of practices and tools. So most anthropologists don't go to do practice ethnography during fieldwork or otherwise with only one type of tool. And we like to take those tools and compare and contrast and see what overall picture they produce. And today, I would say increasingly, maybe become the dominant model, it's participatory and collaborative. So we had a nice discussion at lunch about, do we call people informants or subjects and all of that, and so I was saying, it's more, participants now in sort of a collaborative research effort that we're undertaking, because we're also learning from them and sharing, they're sharing and learning from us. We recognize that we're not doing ethnography fieldwork in small isolated communities like Roy Rappaport did when he wrote the book Pigs for the Ancestors. And it wasn't isolated then, but it was a lot more isolated than it is today. So our fieldwork spans more than one geography, community, or institution site. So it's not only a geographical site, but it's also what is a community. A community doesn't have to be a local community spatially situated. It can be a network of individuals across space at different levels of organization and institutions, and it can be within and outside of institutions itself. Our examination of the linkages among sites at different scales and at temporal scales, spatial and temporal scales. So we look at these connections across sites now, both spatially and temporally, and focus on the intersite flows of knowledge, values, power, materials, and their human and environmental consequences, such as justice, decisions, or policies. So we are interested in flows and consequences, and they can be in a wide range of phenomena. So getting even more specific, so with these kind of orientations, goals that we have for our research methods, what do we have in our toolkit? And some of the major ones here that I focus on is participant observation, interviews and surveys, qualitative to quantitative analysis, and modeling. So participant observation, I say it's a defining method for anthropology. Anthropologists, as a fundamental way of collecting knowledge, understanding, is we participate and we observe. Simultaneously, we emphasize one or the other. We've had people that have done more participation, less observation. We've had observation, participation. We've teased these apart. But we actually go out and participate and observe in human activities in often very unstructured ways, meaning we will participate and observe about what comes up that we don't know about. And so what makes this interesting is that the anthropologist is kind of the instrument or interlocutor. We are actually filtering and processing and putting a frame or a lens on the information that we're collecting and using ourselves as an instrument. And I think that's a very, very powerful sort of observation that I don't know of any other social science discipline that in fact uses the individual as the instrument for data collection, the researcher as an instrument. Most sciences try to keep the researcher as objective as possible. Now, the data or information is subject to very, very different types of analyses, from sort of postmodernist, sort of what Paige was alluding to earlier, sort of writing culture sort of analyses, scientific and humanistic. So the participant observation data that we collect is amenable to many, many different interpretations and analyses. We have manuals and guidance. If you took a qualitative methods class in anthropology, you would actually practice doing participant observation. You would practice writing up your field notes. We have very good methods and critiques of what it means to write up your field notes. It's not just that that's some objective sort of process, but that you actually are contributing to some of the analysis. And this participant observation can be standalone or it can complement other methods. So we do this participant observation, but we also do interviews and surveys. So we use informal interviews to identify relevant issues and topics to complement participant observation. So we go out and we talk to people. We have some questions that's come out of our participant observation or wherever, and we will actually go sit down and interview people. In the informal interview, and there's lots of variations on it, we can start off with a set of questions, but we can add more. We can come back and circle back to others. And on the next informal interview, we may add other questions that weren't in the first interview, etc. It's an informal interview. It's about with key informants or collaborators or participants. These are very, very open-ended questions. It's about kind of learning the lay of the land, checking some of your assumptions, building rapport with people that you're studying, etc. So typically anthropologists do that at the beginning of their research, the method they use. We then use semi-structured interviews to simulate natural discourse, and I think this is one of our most powerful methods. So semi-structured interviews are interviews where we have a small number of questions, but that we apply them to each individual that we interview. But it allows for follow-up questioning in between, probing, etc. The goal of a semi-structured interview is to try to generate something as close to natural discourse on a topic as you can come to. So if you're interested in environmental sustainability, then your questions in a semi-structured interview are oriented to trying to get people to talk in and around, on top, over the topic of environmental sustainability. So it's a very, very effective process. It's a challenging process to implement because you're probing and following, trying to get, just actually get somebody to start talking about it without overly controlling it. But you do have a set of questions as guides. Set of open questions. It produces sort of non-qualitative, but data that's amenable to sort of text analysis. Too often people think you can tabulate things from semi-structured or informal interviews, how many times this topic came up and how many times that topic came up. I would say that's not the best use of these interviews, but rather it's to generate rich discussion on a topic. We now have lots of skill and technology for audio recording and text analysis of that and guidance, so it produces a very rich database. And then finally, sort of structured questionnaires or surveys. In anthropology, we 9.9 times out of 10, I would say, we develop these surveys, questionnaires, after we've done the more qualitative interviewing, participant observation. Okay? We can also do them, we can do interviews and qualitative stuff after the survey as well, and we typically do that. So I think what's unique, not unique, but a strong characteristic of anthropological methods is that we generate the surveys out of the qualitative data that we collect with the people that we interview. And it's used to translate so we collected a lot of rich knowledge in these interviews. Well, how do we find out to what degree that knowledge is shared, or that information or these practices are common to a larger population? So this is about extending the analysis to a larger population than your key informant sample of interviews, or participants. And the results are validated and interpreted using qualitative interview and participant observation data. So some years ago, I worked with some economists, some econometricians, and we built a complex regression model of what were the factors driving women to start work in agricultural fields in Nepal. And we used some time allocation data that I'd collected, and we built this model, and we had a lot of qualitative data leading into the model. And then what I realized, and then we ran the model, and the model predicted a couple things that were the drivers of accounting for women, whether they entered into working in agriculture or not. And I remember a rich moment again in anthropology was after we got the model results, I wanted to interpret it. And my economist friend said, no, we're done. We built the model, and we've tested the model, and we don't need to go back and then bring it to, qualitatively interpret it. So in our use of surveys, we start with qualitative data. We can do a range of statistical modeling analyses on it, but we always bring it, I think, back again to enrich our understanding of that complex sort of holistic topic as well as specific questions. And so that was a rich moment for me in terms of better understanding how our methods, even though that wasn't our regression model that we used, it was a standard model and techniques. It was different than my economist friends and colleagues. So, so we do anthropological modeling, and I want to talk about a couple here. And so in those that are kind of shaded with the light brown, yellow, text models, cultural consensus. Those are things that are, I think, of type of modeling are more specific to anthropology, while the others, which anthropologists do, social network analysis, complex adaptive systems, agent-based modeling, participatory GIS or just GIS, these are very sort of cross-disciplinary sort of approaches. In the picture here is a text model of a harmful algal bloom. Or common motivators among stakeholders. And this is from a study we did on the Eastern Shore where we tried to, with semi-structured interviews, we were able to identify what were the drivers that were people willing to kind of address the issue of a harmful algal bloom on a lake, and then take text around and then find, that there were health issues, there were lake issues, there were environmental issues, and we kind of could build a text-based model of the different themes or issues that people said as opportunities or health risks or save the lake or a liability. These were kind of underlying, we built this model to pick up sort of these underlying model drivers and then applied sort of text analysis over it. So I'll talk tomorrow about cultural modeling, cultural consensus, so I'm going to skip those. So anthropologists do modeling, and some that is unique to us, and also some that is we share with other disciplines, but that we apply kind of following some of these other principles. So what are some of the outcomes of these methods, these goals of our methods, the principles and practices? One thing is that we're very good at doing ethnography and doing case studies. So it's a big part of our research methods. But we also do comparative research, and Monique mentioned that earlier. We're not just interested in a specific ethnography or a specific case study, rich and detailed as that might be, but also in comparative research and looking for patterns, similarities, differences across groups, institutions, regions, etc. I think these methods allow us to do interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research. And certainly by interdisciplinary, we're often asked to come and, I think Monique was saying earlier, explain this, or how do you account for this? Or we had some problem when we were doing this, and we heard that you know these people, and you know the region, so could you come like kind of sort it out and tell us how we could get them to do what we need them to do? Leave those buckets alone, earlier said. So that's been, I think we've had some success at that, but it's different than the transdisciplinary where some of these disciplinary boundaries break down, and we're actually elevating our research methods up to match with the methods and approaches of other disciplines. So again, I think methodologically, that's maybe the first way that we can do our transdisciplinary, rather than perhaps putting too much emphasis on our theories, whether they're cultural ecology or environmental anthropology or political ecology. They will be there and certainly will be expressed in our methods. But I don't mean to trivialize them at all. But I think the methodologies that we use is a way to promote transdisciplinary. Our methods are very, very participatory and collaborative. And they can be, by their very nature, we're asking people, and we should honestly be interested in and engaged in what people know and think and believe and do, the problems they see, the solutions they see, and that first step already gets us halfway to participation. And then engaging them in our research and embracing their research ideas, their experiential local knowledge, global knowledge, etc., is something that I think naturally comes out of our research methodologies. I think our research methods also value and give value and agency to knowledge, values and practices within and between groups. In anthropology, we've been critical of culture, the culture concept, and with good reason to a large degree. But knowledge and people's values and their practices and what generates them within a group and causes them to be similar or different between groups is a powerful, powerful research approach that has lots of benefits and payoffs. And too often, somehow it's seen as not perhaps as useful as a deductive top-down model to explain something. I was here last week, and after I gave a presentation that highlighted what farmers know about land conservation, their knowledge about land conservation. A colleague and friend said, but that can't tell you anything about the environment. And we've had this discussion before, and so the point he was making was that our models for explaining land degradation are explaining a system that local knowledge cannot understand. And I think that there may be some truth to that, but not exhaustively, and that local knowledge or experiential knowledge, whether that be indigenous people or whether that be government officials, whether that be the researchers in this room, is very, very critical to put into our our model building and our research. And but it's not all about just knowledge, values, and practices within and between groups. There are structures out there. There are processes that have covered centuries of time that Paige has referred to. And there are processes that individuals, that capture and have effects on individuals. And so our methods can also get at some of that. And my colleagues here have shared some of that research as well. So these methods, again, tell us a lot about anthropology. As I've taught methods, both qualitative and quantitative, for a number of years, but I found preparing this PowerPoint was quite challenging when I said, okay, let's talk about our research methods in a broad sense. But it reminded me a lot about anthropology. We produce ethnographies, and again, people-centered accounts. I hope I don't beat that theme to death over the next few days. But I hadn't, that's kind of was implicit in my understanding of anthropology. But I think it's even more and more important as I participate in this workshop and also think about what our methods accomplish. Our methods organize our goal to talk and understand people and their concerns. Without these methods, I don't think we'd be able to do what we've kind of charged ourselves to do. They produce data that are valid ethnographically. Our methods are, again, a way that kind of in the end bring us back to this ethnographic pursuit that we have to kind of triangulate and ground our research approaches. And I can't imagine us making advances in our theories without using our methods to collect empirical data. And that doesn't mean that it has to be just at one moment in time. It can be over time, and it can be at multi-levels. But without these methods, I don't think we can keep advancing our theoretical assumptions.